Thank you for joining Once Changing the World, India's first Future Tech meets Sustainability podcast. And today, I'm delighted and honored to have me, Mr. Alvin Wang Graylin, who is an executive, author, investor, and technology pioneer with over 3 decades of experience driving innovation in artificial intelligence, extended reality, and semiconductors. He currently serves as Global Vice President at HTC, Chairman of the Virtual World Society, Vice Chair of the Industry of VR Alliance, and President of the Virtual Reality Venture Capital Alliance. Alvin is a serial entrepreneur, an active investor, and has funded over 100 startups and played a pivotal role in the establishment of HTC's Vive X Global VR Accelerator and SOSV's Mobile Internet Investment Incubator. And he has co-authored on Next Reality that examines how AI and XR convergence will reshape society. So, Alvin, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Wanted to start with the China-US relationships. So nations have always been in this race to assert superiority. So earlier it was military and economic power which gave it an edge. Now nations are after these microchips that power these exponential tech stack. The US government has banned NVIDIA to sell its most advanced AI processors to China. But China still seems to be hoarding semiconductors in anticipation of further US sanctions, which seems to be fair enough because any country would do something like that. As someone who has successfully operated in both Silicon Valley and China's tech ecosystem, how do you view the US-China geopolitical tensions impacting both the Chinese as well as US entrepreneurs? And do you see this race for AI supremacy a possible cause for World War III?
Yeah, well, that's a lot of questions, and it's an important topic. In fact, I think it's one of the most important topics that we have in the technology space today because the ramifications are so great. You talked about the economic war and the military buildup, and I think in the past, especially when you look at the military, there's really one use case for it, and it is for destruction and war. But the difference is AI probably has a lot more use cases in the civilian case, in helping bring more efficiency and helping create more discoveries and helping give people more time for their lives and solving global issues. Unfortunately, the governments are much more focused on the destructive nature of the technology, and all technologies are two-edged swords. So it's natural that there is a positive and negative use cases for them. But in the case of AI, the positive use cases are much larger. And I don't think the governments, particularly I think the US government, is not it's not focused on the right area. And I think the approach that we're seeing today is about hampering the other side, and mostly from the U.S. trying to hamper China's development because it sees it as a economic threat. I really don't, even though there's a lot of rhetoric about the use of AI, military, and so forth, that's probably a little bit of a rouge. The reality is, I think the U.S. government is afraid of China rising up in its economic power to overtake the U.S. in terms of its strength on the economic and maybe geopolitical view, but a lot less so on the military perspective. And I've actually spent time in the last few years talking to a number of folks in both areas, and in both sides of the ocean, and on also in both the policy side as well as the economic areas. In fact, just yesterday there was an article that came out in Wired magazine that gave some views about this. Unfortunately, it was a very shortened version of what we had submitted, but I think the effort right now to hamper progress is backfiring. Right. Essentially, what's happening is because of that type of a policy, China is now forced to create a lot more indigenous capabilities, both for semiconductor manufacturing as well as design, as well as creating its own AI, stack and infrastructure. And by doing so, it actually reduces the opportunity for cooperation. Before, when there was a lot more uh, mutual reliance, there's a lot more area for conversation. And the problem right now is when both sides feel more independent of each other, there's a lot less need to talk. And when you don't talk, you have more room for accidental conflict, right? And I don't think either country wants to get into an overt kinetic conflict. It's just not good for either side, especially when both countries have such military strength. So I, what I'm more afraid of is us sleepwalking into World War III than us, directly starting World War III. But I believe that AI could be a spark that might allow this to happen, not necessarily by intent, but because of slippery slope issues that we would escalate into when one side believes that it has an advantage. And I've spoken to folks in the U.S. administration who say that, hey, we think we can win this AI arms race, and we haven't a measurable lead. Unfortunately, that the measurable lead that the administration thinks it has really is not as much of a lead as it really is. And when we can see that today, where essentially within a month or 2 months of the frontier models coming out of the West, you'll get equivalent, and in some cases, maybe even a higher performance out of the models coming out of China. And those models have been trained or tuned on a fraction of the resources of the U.S. models, which means that they're just a lot more efficient. And that efficiency essentially completely reduces the impact that the U.S. has had with its various semiconductor sanctions, because the fundamental theory behind the sanctions is that by reducing the compute, and because of the scaling laws, compute is actually the constraint that that is able to keep progress from happening. The reality that constraint is no longer the case. Both because of algorithmic improvements, as well as now more moving from training time to test time compute. That changes the I guess it changes the amount of impact that you get from having a large amount of compute in your stack. And I think then without that, in some ways, China probably has an advantage, and I think a lot of Americans would also, researchers would also agree with that, is that there are some advantages in their data capacity or data access, right? So, or at least legal data access, because of the different laws and rights in each country, and that may if compute is no longer constraint, then if data is the next constraint, then China may actually have an advantage, right? And if you look at algorithms come from AI researchers, and right now globally there's about 47% of all AI researchers in the world are Chinese born. So there is no lack of talent for algorithmic improvements. When you look at it from these various perspectives, there really is no advantage. And when you know that there's no advantage, and maybe when you accept that there's no advantage, then probably the right move is to work together. Whereas when one side believes it has an advantage, then you think you can win, then you try to win. And I don't think that type of a game theory analysis of a zero-sum game is the right attitude or perspective to approach this problem. Because if we are able to work together, create a AGI solution, which then can help us solve some of the looming issues we've had, things like climate and energy and food shortage and health and all of these things that we've been challenged with for millennia. If we can solve those problems, then a lot of the basis for conflict goes away. So unfortunately, I don't think right now people in position of power are looking as long term as they should be. And that was one of the impetus for me to have, push for that article with Wired. We'll actually have another article coming out soon, likely with well, I won't say anything, but another media channel, respected media channel, that I think will give it a little bit more depth about why we need to work together versus fight and have this race, because this is a race to an end that will not end well for either party, for not just for the U.S. and China, but actually for the globe. Because once you race and you get to a point where you think you have advantage, then you start using that advantage, and that advantage then goes from cyber warfare to potentially escalating into kinetic warfare, and kinetic warfare between two nuclear powers will not end well.
Exactly, exactly. So, Alvin, I think we're sitting in such a fantastic point of time. These tech stack. I mean, the self-learning tech stack. The first time we've kind of experiencing these things. And you rightfully pointed out. We at this point in time, I think we need to more conversations and more collaborations. But the complete opposite has been happening. Last week the US released their AI diffusion. They put out the AI diffusion policy and export controls, and it's divided these countries into three different distinct groups. Uh, how is this gonna how's it gonna pan out?
Yeah, this is unfortunate, and that was one of the impetus for me to push for that article, because I think we need to voice a little bit more reason in terms of how these policies are made, because unfortunately, and I know some of the people who are advising the policymakers, they have I think a biased view in terms of how they believe the advantage. Maybe there was at one point, I think, a temporary advantage that the U.S. had over China. They thought that that advantage is sustainable, and they thought that that sustainable advantage would allow them to maintain a technical lead, which would allow the U.S. to have a long-term dominance. And I think that logic is flawed. And they don't realize it. And I think they're hiding from that truth because they've been saying this story for such a long time that by switching their views, it discredits what they've been, telling the policymakers, and then they're afraid to do that.
Right. Right. Is there a way out of this zero sum game that we are all racing towards? Because in your Wired interview, you touch upon collaboration. It could decentralized AI guarantee like a safer, equitable outcome?
We need to educate both the people who are advising the policymakers as well as the policymakers themselves that the world is not a zero sum game. And unfortunately, the people who are advising them have a much more of a fixed mindset, and a, um, a finite game type of a algorithm for how they're calculating the moves. And the reality is that we are not in a closed system. And we will soon, if we properly utilize the value of what AI can bring, we could potentially get to a world of abundance where, all the constraints that have propagated how geopolitics have worked, and global warfare and relationships between nations have worked, will no longer be true, because that in the past it was all about getting access to resource, getting access to markets, creating financial dominance over others, creating military dominance over others, and all of that in a way to be able to bring your country or your people a certain advantage so that they can have a better quality of life. I mean, that's the underlying assumption. Now, I mean, I think there is some level of maybe personal gains that people are doing, or maintenance of personal power that now is creeping in, where even if you tell them that, hey, if we properly leverage this technology, we will be able to have enough resources for the entire world to have a high quality of life. They may still decide that, hey, I don't want that future. I actually want a future where there is inequality. I want a future where I have more than others. And unfortunately, I think that what they don't realize is that if you pursue that type of a future, we have a potential to end up in a world where nobody has anything, right? And what is the value of having billions of dollars in the bank if you look outside and everything's on fire? You know, when we reframe the when we reframe the conflict as a no-win conflict where nobody can win, then I think we will then think about it in a different way. Where right now people still think they can win, and there is value in winning. Um, I guess my probably my message to those people is that if any one party wins, the entire human race will lose, and that's something they don't yet either realize or want to understand. And I would like that to change because there's a lot of data that is showing that we are getting very close to AGI, and if we then can leverage AGI to then help us solve some of these problems that have like this for a very long time, then we can in a relatively short time get to a world where we can get to a more utopian future, right? It sounds idealistic, but it is actually achievable. Whereas before, we were still decades away when people talk about AGI. Now we're really, years away, if not months away from that.
Right, right. And so, I mean, yeah, I hope the narrative changes. I hope that people, like, I mean, nations, take heed, because I think we're sitting in such a fantastic point of time. These tech stack, which is converging, is so potential. And each of this tech stack, like you rightfully pointed out, is like a double-edged sword. And tech inherently is never good or bad. It's how we kind of use it in the direction that we take. And I hope that we, or the nations, the powers that be, take it to a direction where it's more equitable. Your book on next reality, I think it's a fantastic book, and then people should go through this book. uh, Immersive tech, you've been invested in AR, VR, MR since the longest time. I've been invested in virtual reality. And you talk about this convergence of sorts, where artificial intelligence meets virtual reality, which will kind of shape our next reality. Can you elaborate on this? What would be the impact as well as the disruption, when we kind of transition from carrying technology to wearing technology?
Over the last 5, 6, 7 decades, digital technology has become a greater and greater part of our world, but we've really still been operating in a 2D type environment, right? So a screen in front of our face. The reality is that us as a species have evolved and optimized for a 3D environment, and that's how we best communicate. That's how we best learn. That's how we best entertain ourselves. So by having a technology, a medium that allows you to express yourself in a 3D environment and to communicate in a 3D environment, I think we will be able to both virtually create unlimited resources, because a lot of the conflicts that we just talked about earlier was because of limited resources. When you're in a digital world, you no longer have digital abundance, right? That's we already have digital abundance today in terms of a 2D screen. We can watch movies, we play games, but it doesn't feel real. But when you put it into a 3D immersive environment, your brain can't tell the difference after a little while, and you will get all the benefits and enjoyment and fulfillment from that type of environment, and you will be able to educate people a lot better. And I actually think that that's one of the keys. Is a lot of the conflicts that we have today is because of the lack of understanding of each other, and also just basic knowledge about the ramifications of their decisions. And if people have a more efficient way to communicate with other people around the world, I think a lot of those misunderstandings will go away. And if we are able to educate complex topics in a more immersive way, then those can be absorbed by people of any technical knowledge in a way that makes them have the deep enough understanding to make more informed decisions. And then, those are just very kind of basic aspects. But in a lot of ways, I believe that a highly developed 3D metaverse or kind of multi-world environment is a required criteria for AI to fully mature, and for us to work with it in a way that creates a safe outcome. In fact, everybody realizes that creating 3D experiences require AI from many aspects, whether it's from content creation to tools to capture and to interfaces. But a lot of people don't realize that for AI to mature, having these 3D environments is also a requirement. If you look at what's happening with all of the robot trainings, they're all being done now, or a lot of it is being done in virtual 3D environments with virtual physics models, where they simulate edge cases that it's very difficult to do, or they speed up time so that you can train in thousands of years what in a few minutes, right? And I think that's helpful for helping the technology understand the real world. The other thing is, um, there will be significant job displacement that will come from AI adoption into the workplace, just because it is just so much more efficient, and it will replace us in a lot of cognitive labor, and within a decade, it will probably replace a lot of the manual labor as well as robotics improves, and we can see significant improvements just over the last few years in the humanoid robotics and even non-humanoid robotics areas. So then what happens when you have 20, 30, 50, 60% of the workforce out of work? What will they do to give themselves purpose? I think this is also another place where a global metaverse platform can play a significant role, both for mental health, because it allows people to have a place to have an outlet for their energies, have a place where they can express themselves, where they can entertain themselves, where they can communicate. But it also can create a parallel layer digital economy that allows people anywhere in the world to have a borderless commerce, whether commerce over information, commerce over content, or commerce over services, which is not constrained by the current physical borders that limit us in terms of how the labor pool availability works. So there really is a interdependence between these two technologies, and even if we didn't have the arms race, this issue of job displacement will happen. Right. So even if we solve all of that, so we still need to make sure that the government provides a proper social safety net in the form of a UBI or UBS type solution. But at the same time, you need something to give people purpose, to give people a reason to wake up, give people people a sense of their value to the world. And I think a mature metaverse infrastructure will do that.
Right, right. Yeah, I think there needs to be more conversations because I don't think the larger population is aware of the disruption that's around the corner. When you say that, there's going to be like 20, 30, 40, 50% of job loss, which is, I mean, might happen in possibly in a for a time frame of maybe like 5 years, 10 years or beyond, because the way these LLM tech stacks are growing, leading to agentic AI, then you're talking about these artificial general intelligence, which the world is kind of working towards. We we don't really know what's gonna how things are gonna pan out, and if people do lose work, how is society gonna react to that, because we work is which gives us meaning, and when the meaning is taken away, you mentioned possibly these UBI could come and play, but I don't think people kind of understand that. I think there needs to be like more governments, more people kind of coming together and raising awareness and making people understand that we are at this cusp of this huge disruption globally. And even with AI, I think the government needs to wake up and smell the coffee that, even if we don't collaborate, if we don't go towards decentralized AI, I think we're going towards a zero-sum game, and it's not going to pan out nice for any one of us. You've been invested in both mobile as well as virtual reality and augmented reality. You rightfully pointed out that we live in a 3D world, but we are restricted with all our interfaces restrict us to a 2D interface, mobiles, TVs, whatever. But we are at the cusp of like breaking that interface and getting into the 3D world. How do you envision this future of personal computing? Because your mobiles it's lost its utility. You think that these smartphones eventually will be replaced, and will be great if you could also talk about HTC, these Vive products plus Viverse, and what can we expect to see in 2025 and beyond?
I actually have been lucky enough to have gone through the entire evolution of the whole PC industry, the mobile industry, the mobile internet, and now the VR, and then the AI space, and over the last 4 decades, seeing all of these technologies mature. And if you look at amount of time we spend in front of the screen, continually we've changed from larger screens to smaller screens. What we are going to find is that we will soon have glasses form factors that have displays in them, and that has some level of compute. The phones that are in our pocket at some point may not even need a screen, and is performing really more as a compute unit and a antenna to the larger network. And I think that will take a little bit of time to happen. And even if there's a screen, you will use that screen a lot less than we do today. We're spending somewhere between 10 to 12 hours a day in front of screens. If you take into the computer, the TV, the phones, and for younger people, a lot of that time is actually on their phones. And honestly, I don't think that's a necessarily healthy thing. Both from a ergonomic and physical of looking down all the time, but also from the social perspective of when you're looking down, you're not seeing the people in front of you, and you're not seeing the people around you, and you start to isolate yourself. Even if you live in a city or in a classroom, you no longer take into account those people. And that isolation actually, I think, is one of the reasons why we've created a much more lonely generation of these Gen X and Gen Alpha populations. And they also are seeking too much of their fulfillment from what's happening online versus what's happening face to face. And the, the sad thing is that when we get to the point where AI becomes more mature, uh, we will actually have be required, and probably the only thing that will bring us fulfillment that you're talking about, that long-term happiness, is our relationship with each other. And the technology today is taking us the wrong direction. This is why I'm actually very hopeful about glasses form factors, because a glasses form factor, even though people think, oh, yeah, I want a screen in front of my eyes all the time. But a glasses form factor, when you have an ability to turn on and off that screen, you're able to actually look up. And when you look up and if there's people in front of you, you actually see them in real time. Now you can augment that view if they're not around, or maybe to enhance the conversation. But at the same time, you're still talking to the person in front of you. And we've evolved as a social species where when you're talking face to face, you connect and you create relationships. And that's actually why I believe that XR has the potential to do some of these things, because when you put on a headset, even if that person's 1,000 miles away, you see them and you react to each other, and you have that physicality that comes with a spatial medium. And that allows you to connect. Because I've had friends that I've never met in person, but I've only met them in 3D spaces. And when I meet them in person, I feel like I've known them for years, right? And and I think we will get to a point where when we are no longer when human labor is no longer what creates productivity in the world, that the only thing that will matter is actually our social relationships, and how we make the people around us feel, and how we feel we are affecting the minds and ideas and thoughts of the people around the world. Right? And at that point, um, I, I, I think that having a richer medium for us to express ourselves will be the primary thing that we do to give ourselves a purpose, right? Versus today, a lot of people, their purpose or their identity is their jobs, and their title, and how much they make, and what they have bought. And at the end of the day, at some point within the next 50 years, I would say probably 99% of people will be out of a job, right? Then everybody will have the same title. We will be a much more egalitarian world if we don't destroy ourselves in the meantime. And I don't think that's a bad thing. What you will hear some people say is that, oh, the world has been unequal for so long. There's no way for us to be in a world, egalitarian world. It's not our nature. What I don't think most people realize is that for the majority, for 95% of the existence of humans, we lived in a very egalitarian world. We as a species have been around for 300,000 years, and only the last 10,000 years have we had um, status and structure and hierarchy. In the past, we've lived in small tribal communities of 20, 30, 50 people. And they lived in the same tents and the huts and the caves, and they hunted the same things, and they ate the same things, and they did the same things, right? And even if you're the chief for that period of time of your tribe, you have the same experience as everybody. And in some cases, they're the last to eat, and they give the stuff, more of their wealth and capability, to other people as a sign of their leadership. And I think we can get back to that. And they lived in a world of abundance in a lot of ways, if you think about it, especially the ones that were in richer, uh, symbiotic ecosystems, where there was plenty of food and plenty of game. um, and that was in a time when, for the majority of the history of the human species, we've had about 100,000 or less humans on Earth. So there was no sense of scarcity. Uh, Now 8 billion people, that scarcity has crept in. We forced it on. And when you have cities of tens of millions of people, you have to have structure, you have to have hierarchy, because that's how you can manage that type of an organization. But if AI is able to then create that infinite or near infinite productivity, then we can go back to the world where we used to be, where the majority of the existence of our species have been, and go back to a much more egalitarian world. And I think that is possible. And in fact, it's actually more natural, because we in that space a lot longer than we have in the last 5 to 10,000 years. So this is part of what I was saying, is that people need to look at history. They need to look at archaeology and biology and philosophy more than just economics and finance, which is what or law, which is what most people right now that are making these decisions are their backgrounds come from. So
Right. Yeah. So I think we live in a crazy world because I think everybody is trying to become a millionaire, billionaire, but yet, but that money should be giving them happiness. Yet everyone is so stressed out and depressed. So yeah, I think we need to completely change because I mean today, I I believe I think 10 people hold the I think 80 or 90% of the entire economic value. And there was one talk that you were talking about how Bitcoin itself is completely twisted, where these whales who hoard like the 80% or 90% of the entire Bitcoins or tokens over there. So it's not at all decentralized. It's some sort of re-centralization of sorts. So I think yeah, people need to kind of look at it in a very like a cleaner lens rather than taking these narratives. Now in a book, Your Next Reality, you discuss about how web 2.0's data practices have led to consumer and election manipulation and even digital surveillance. But immersive tech, I mean, that itself also has got this same cons, because once you wear these headsets, it can now track not just clicks, it can look at your eye gaze, where you're looking at, your emotional responses, your physical movements. What safeguards do you believe are essentials to prevent the metaverse from becoming an even more intrusive surveillance system? And my second question is, you are part of the Virtual Reality Venture Capital Alliance, and you oversee the Vive XR Accelerator. How do you see the XR startup investment, shaping up in 2025 and beyond?
well, you just talked several big questions. I'll try to answer them. First of all, I think that there is an issue today that we overly celebrate wealth and power and status. and don't appreciate the little things in life that bring us true happiness. And studies after study have shown that more money does not bring us more happiness. And in fact, um, what the data seems to show is that when you get to a certain point, having more money actually brings you more stress, which actually reduces your happiness. And for most nations, it's somewhere around 70% of the uh, you know 70 percentile in terms of GDP per capita of your country. So it's not even an absolute number. So if you're in Africa, it's a different number than if you're in Asia versus a different number if you're in the US, right? And as long as you're a little bit better than your neighbor, you're actually pretty happy. And that's I guess that's also a sign of the flexibility of the mindset of humans and our adaptability, right? Because for us to survive, we have to be able to survive in different environments, and as long as we feel like, hey, we're as good or better than our neighbors, that's enough. I don't need to be the richest guy in the world or the richest guy in my country, right? And in fact, when you're at that position, then you're always afraid of being overtaken by somebody. Somebody's trying to take you down. Somebody's trying to kill you or something. I mean, there's just a lot of stress that comes from being a major celebrity or a major tycoon. So we actually have an ability now, because of the coming increased productivity, to get everybody to that quality of life where you have a more European mindset. Actually, it seems like the Europeans have a lesser per capita income than the Americans, but they're generally much more happy. And they're pursuant to be the billionaire. There's a lot less of that mentality, whereas the U.S. is much more focused on wealth creation and wealth accumulation. One of the talks I recently gave is to young people, and I really want to stress this, is that we should be more focused on how much time we have in our life, and how do we use that time, and the wealth that we have in terms of lifespan, than the wealth that we have in our bank. And when you look at it from that perspective, everybody is actually relatively equal, right? We're all billionaires. We're all seconds billionaires. We're time billionaires in terms of how many seconds in our lives. We all can average around 2 billion seconds in our lives for the average lifespan around the world. And it's actually quite equal. No matter the most unequal country in the world, or most wealthy and developed country, their lifespan are actually very similar now. From that health perspective, we've gotten past that. Now there's a small range, and also within the countries, even the most unequal countries, the lifespan of the rich and the poor is still within probably 10 or 15%. Right. So that's how I think we should be measuring wealth, is how much time do we have on this earth now to express our value on this planet. When we change that to be our goal and our mindset to contribute the most in the limited time that we have, I think it's a much more positive way of pursuing how we spend our time, and looking at as how much can we contribute in the time that we have. And the richest people right now are actually the youngest people. Whereas right now in the real world, in the world of today, or the metrics of today, the richest are usually the older portions of our population who have spent their time accumulating. And we all know we can't take it with us. Right? So really, I think the wealth really does lie in our future generations. And you talked about Bitcoin, and I think it is a very distorted view of reality. And the people who are the biggest proponents are usually the people who have the biggest holdings. So they are completely biased in terms of the way that they paint the picture of what that means. And they paint it as something that is decentralized and it's good for everybody, and anybody can be wealthy. And the reality is that the algorithm of Bitcoin is a very unequal algorithm, because it gives a lot of coins to the people who found out and joined it first or bought it first. And then over time, that amount is completely fixed. There's only, I think, 21 or 22 million Bitcoins that will ever be made. And 95% of it has already been made. So and a very small percentage of them hold on to a very large actually a very small number, just actually a few hundred people own the majority of the Bitcoins today. And so essentially, not just are we talking about a few hundred versus 8 billion today, it's about a few hundred versus the 100 billion or more billions that will be coming ever in the future. Because by 2100 or so, there will be no more Bitcoins printed, right? So it is a deflationary asset. Now, the people always put down inflation, say inflation is a bad thing. But in terms of equity and equality, inflation is actually one of the best things that the economy can do to allow old wealth to deteriorate over time so that new people can become wealthy and have a purpose in life to try to gain their status in the world. But in a world where there will be no more Bitcoins printed, essentially anybody that's born after essentially 2100 or anybody that does not hold Bitcoin today will never be wealthy. From the metrics of how we judge it. It's about how many coins you have. So it is a very distorted view of reality and a distorted view of the financial ecosystem, and it's been painted in a way that it is seen as a altruistic technology. But that algorithm is the way it's designed is probably the most unequal economics that exists today. And it has scaled to a multi-trillion-dollar valuation. So it is sizable. I think that I'm not saying that there's anything innately wrong with the technology or with cryptocurrencies in general, because I think that there will be use cases where that makes sense. But the current way that it has been distributed, the current unequal way that it has been distributed, and the fact that it was distributed in a way that a very small portion of the world knew about it, has access to it, and it is complicated enough that really most people would not know how to even get it if you gave them some today, and how to use it and access it. So it is a complicated technology that is not something that creates equality, and I think it's been the narrative around it has been it's there's a lot of misunderstandings, I'll just say, around what this technology represents. I actually, most countries today are working on CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, that are based on some of the similar technologies, but distributed by nation states, which has a responsibility to their citizenship, right? But maybe has some of the programmability of cryptocurrencies in terms of how they can be distributed. And you can do it banklessly. You can put rules around how you spend it, which I actually see as a benefit to society. That type of a model is much more able to realize the promise of what people talk about when they talk about cryptocurrency, while having some underlying justification, at least however we justify fiat currency today, and it has lasted for hundreds of years, versus a technology in terms of Bitcoin that's lasted for a little over 10 years, right? There's no durability. There's no proof of durability in that model today. And as we know, looking historically, whenever there is inequality in the world and that inequality gets to extreme, people resolve that inequality by force and by revolution and by wars. And if we rely on a technology where a few hundreds of people control 90% of the wealth of the world, and nobody can ever get access to wealth again, that inevitably will end in a revolution or some form of violence. And I don't think that's a positive outcome.
Where yes, I mean, just to kind of I mean, speak to Bitcoin. I think blockchain is such a fantastic tech. The interoperability, the decentralization, the transparency, the immutability. I mean, but I think we live in a profit at cost world. So I mean, the entrepreneurs kind of twisted, and they've twisted the ethos of blockchain. So my last question to you, if you could talk about HTC Vive plus Viverse, HTC Vive, any other products. I mean, that's coming out in 2025. Plans for India market and virtual reality, the future of it. Because Ivan, I want to give this quote out of Ivan Sutherland, who mentioned that the ultimate display would, of course, be a room within which the computer can control the existence of matter. A chair displayed in such a room would be good enough to sit in. Handcuffs displayed in such a room would be confining, and a bullet displayed in such a room would be fatal. What do you make of that? Because there's Donald Hoffman, I really follow, and he with the physicist Nima Hamid Harkani has put out this theory that space and time are nothing but a virtual reality headset. It's a virtual reality construct. And it's not just Donald Hoffman. There's others like Nick Boston who talks about the entire universe being a simulation. So yes, I mean, two questions. One is HTC Vive, the products, Viverse, plans for India market, and what are your thoughts on are we living in a simulated reality?
Okay. These are all deep questions that every question you ask could be like an hour. Um, I guess given that we really don't talk a lot about our future plans, what I can say is historically HTC is its philosophy is really about openness. It's about creating solutions that everybody can join and collaborate to create. And this is why we created the Vive port, so that and to make that accessible to other hardware vendors. This is why we created multiple standards and shared our technology related to the tracking systems and to our devices. Um, and Viverse is really the next, I guess, incarnation of that, where we believe that having a open and interoperable metaverse environment is good for everybody, and something that is device independent, right? Because if you look at most of the metaverse platforms out there, they're all focused on a specific hardware stack. And the value of any network is really the number of nodes and active nodes that are in there. And when you limit it to a specific hardware stack, you limit the value of that network. And so this is why the internet has been successful, is because of its openness. And the ability for anybody in the world to access it and communicate with anybody else. And so we would like to see a WebXR type solution, a open metaverse solution. Whether or not it's Viverse is actually not important. I think Viverse is our way of getting that conversation started. But just like in the beginning of the internet, we had Prodigy and AOL and CompuServe, and they were vertical stacks that didn't talk to each other, and they were overtaken in time by the World Wide Web and what we have today. So I think that trend will continue with the evolution of the metaverse type platforms out there. On your question of the whether or not having fully physical nature of virtual reality is really a desired long-term outcome. I would maybe equate it to, I would think that the best form of VR is not that holodeck with physicality. I think the best version of VR is what we do every night, which is dreaming, where you allow your imagination to play, and the ramifications of mistakes are limited. Whereas what you're describing, where somebody dies in the game, they die in reality, and the whole faux die thing, I'm actually not a fan of that type of philosophy, because we need to be able to learn from our mistakes. And when you're in a virtual environment, the benefit of a virtual environment is that you can experiment without risk, right? And this is why a lot of people are using these things for high risk type training. If you're doing military training or police training or construction zones or surgeries, you don't want to be doing these things the first time in the physical world, where the ramifications of a mistake can be dire. Right. So I would not want my simulation to have the same constraints as a physical world. Now, the last question of, do we live in a simulation? There's a lot of smart people that have talked about this. I don't think there's really agreement even among the most educated, informed people. So I have my own view. I guess my view is that there is a possibility, but whether or not we are, I don't think it actually changes how I would behave in that world. And I think that's really the important thing is, um, because we are living in the version that you talked about, where a mistake in the physical world will mean game over for us, we should value, we should um, rejoice in the time that we have, and we should try to take advantage of it to do the most that we can, whether or not it is a simulation. And from a more biological perspective, everybody's existence is a simulation of a brain that has no view of the world except the few sensors that is this getting information from. And we create, this conversation that we are having is a created simulation that's in the brain that is shut off from the world. And I'm transferring some audio and some video signals to that brain, and it's interpreting it, and then it's analyzing how I should respond to it. So if you look at it from that perspective, yes, we are absolutely, every single person is in a simulated environment because we are creating our own simulation. We are creating our own world. Now, whether the universe is a simulation, I don't think we are smart enough to give a definite answer. And then and at the end of the day, I it goes back to, if it doesn't change the way I will behave, then it really doesn't matter.
Completely. Alvin, really, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Just wanted to end with this. John Smart has this hypothesis called the transcension hypothesis, where he says that we came out of an atom, a big bang, and then eventually, with our technology miniaturizing, eventually we go back into the atom. But yes, I think we're sitting in such a fantastic point of time. I hope that we talk more, we create more technology which is more equitable, because we live in a world which is hyper connected, and what happens at a certain part of the world impacts the entire world. And I hope that we know that we understand that we live in one world, and this zero sum game that we are headed towards is only going to lead us to a terrible future. So
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you're ending on that, because in a zero sum game, your objective is to win. But I think what people don't realize is that we are not working in a finite one turn game. So people talk about the prisoner's dilemma, right? And the prisoner's dilemma, the game theory optimum solution is actually to defect on your opponent, and you still go to jail, but you go to jail shorter because you don't know if they're going to defect on you. But what we are living in is an infinite game where there is a reprisal. And when you take game theory and you put it onto a infinite game, the optimal solution is actually not to defect, but to play tit for tat. But to start the tit for tat solution with believing and collaborating first. And I think we need to change our mindset, because we live in an infinite world, or at least infinite from our lifespan perspective. So it is a multi-turn game. If it's a multi-turn game, we need to collaborate. And collaboration brings you the optimal, because then both prisoners go free, right? So we need to change the people's who are advising our leaders, in the sense that we all live in we need to think longer, and we live in a collaborative environment. And by cooperating, we can all win, versus when we live in a finite zero sum game, there's always a winner and a loser. And that is not the reality that we live in today. And it is not the reality that we will be creating if we properly utilize what's coming with AI.
I hope we go into a world we all win. And for those people who have not read this book, On Next Reality, it's a fantastic book. I suggest that you pick this up. And thank you once again for taking time and being part of the podcast to my listeners. If you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. Until next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and appreciate your invite. It's been a fun conversation. So
thank you. Take care. See you.
bye bye.
Bye.